Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a story with a number so big it's almost hard to believe, a scandal that has set off a full-blown political war, and a pretty shocking claim that California might just be at the center of a national crisis. So let's get right into it.
Okay, so it all kicks off with this number, $3.5 billion. Now that's the estimated loss from just one Medicare fraud scheme in Southern California. I mean, that's a massive figure all by itself, right? But believe it or not, as we're about to see, that's not even close to the whole story.
And that's the big question, right? What if that massive number is just the tip of the iceberg? The investigative report we're digging into today makes a powerful case that this one scheme, well, it's just a symptom of a much, much bigger crisis. And it has started an absolutely explosive political fight over who's to blame. All right, so first up, let's take a closer look at that visible part of the iceberg. We're talking about a really shocking fraud scheme that revolved around end-of-life care. This is the scandal that kind of blew the lid off the whole thing. So, how did it work? The scheme itself was almost deceptively simple. You had these criminal rings that would go out and recruit perfectly healthy people. And get this, sometimes the people didn't even know it was happening. Then they'd bill Medicare for all this expensive hospice care that, of course, was never actually delivered. And to keep the whole thing running, to keep that pipeline of patients flowing, they'd offer illegal kickbacks for referrals. It's a system that really exploited some of the most vulnerable people out there.
What first tipped off the federal investigators was something really strange, a geographic clue. In this one tiny neighborhood, Van Nuys, there were dozens and dozens of these sketchy hospice agencies all packed together. It was just a giant red flag. It screamed that this wasn't just a couple of bad apples, but a highly organized, large-scale criminal enterprise. Okay, so with that much money on the line, we're talking billions. The sheer scale of this fraud meant Washington couldn't ignore it anymore. It forced them to take notice, which led to a very high-profile federal accusation and eventually intervention.
And this is where the story gets really interesting and just explodes onto the national scene. The head of Medicare and Medicaid Services at the time, Dr. Mehmet Oz, actually flew out to California himself in early 2026. He started releasing these videos calling the whole thing an epidemic. And as you can imagine, that sparked a total media firestorm and kicked off a huge political war.
So with all this pressure mounting, California did do something. The report says the state pulled the licenses of over 280 of these hospice agencies, which sounds like a lot, right? But the big question everyone was asking was that really enough?
And here's where things really escalated. Because instead of, just cooperating with the federal investigation, California's leadership went on the attack, went on the defensive. And that created this massive political standoff we're seeing today.
So what you have is a total standoff with two completely different stories. On one side, you've got the feds saying, look, California wasn't doing enough, so we had to step in. On the other side, the state is firing back, saying, no, we are being proactive, and this whole federal thing is just a politically motivated, discriminatory attack.
Yeah, from the federal point of view, what the state was doing was basically a drop in the bucket. They were like, okay, you took some steps, we see that, but it's nowhere near enough to stop these billions of dollars from being lost. And in their minds, that made a national intervention totally essential.
Wow. So California's response was, explosive. Governor Newsom's administration didn't just push back, they went on the offensive. They actually filed a civil rights complaint against Dr. Oz himself, accusing him of making, and I'm quoting here, baseless and racist allegations. They basically painted the entire federal investigation as a political hit job.
Okay, so how did we get here so fast? This timeline really helps lay it all out. You can see the state put a pause on new licenses way back in 2022. But then, by 2025, you see federal prosecutions really starting to ramp up. The real flashpoint, though, was January 2026. You have Dr. Oz's very public visit, and then, boom, just days later, the governor hits back with that civil rights complaint. It all happened incredibly quickly.
But this is where the report we're looking at makes its most jaw-dropping claim. That hospice scandal, as huge as it is, that's not the real story. It's just one symptom of a much, much bigger problem. Now, we're going to look at the rest of the iceberg.
Okay, remember where we started? $3.5 billion in hospice fraud. That's the part of the iceberg sticking out of the water, the part everyone can see.
But now, let's look below the surface. The report points to another number, an estimated $32 billion lost to pandemic unemployment fraud in California.
We're talking about money that went to people who weren't eligible, and even to inmates inside state prisons.
And that brings us to the truly mind-blowing number at the very heart of this report. The total estimated loss across all state programs from fraud, waste, and abuse is $250 billion. Let me say that again. $250 billion. This is the whole iceberg.
You know, a number that big is, unsurprisingly, going to lead to some pretty harsh criticism. The report actually quotes one whistleblower who just puts it bluntly, saying California has earned itself the label America's fraud capital.
So, where does all of this leave California? Well, the state is pretty clearly at a crossroads, right? It's facing a fundamental choice between real accountability and just sticking with the status quo.
And hey, just as a quick side note, all the information we're breaking down for you today comes from a really deep investigative report published by the Shasta Biku.
So, what's the bottom line here? It's a stalemate. You've got federal investigators pushing harder and harder, and you've got state leaders digging their heels in, refusing to budge. And who's caught in the middle of this whole political showdown? Billions and billions of taxpayer dollars.
Which really leaves us with one final and pretty urgent question that the report poses. With a potential $250 billion problem lurking just under the surface, are California's leaders actually going to confront the entire iceberg? Or is this political battle just a convenient distraction to keep defending the status quo? Right now, that's a question nobody has the answer to.